Okay, so good afternoon. I'm only 20 minutes late thanks to 4 accidents coming down here. My name is Evan Weiner, and I'm going to talk about this guy here, William McKinley. And I don't know how much you know about William McKinley.
Nothing.
Nothing. Do you know he was assassinated?
No.
He was assassinated in 1901. Most people, that's the only thing they know about him. He was assassinated. But we're going to give you a little background on him and everything else that was going on in a surprisingly modern 1897. So McKinley becomes president. He replaces this guy, Grover Cleveland, who was blamed for the Depression of 1893 that McKinley helped cause with his tariffs in 1890. Also, the beginning of the United Mine Workers as a potent group in the United States starts in 1897 with the Latimer, Pennsylvania massacre. There were race riots. There were probably lynchings every other day in the United States in 1897. This whites versus blacks. This is from Arkansas. Here's a guy being lynched in 1897. Women's rights, well, women didn't have too many rights. In the 1800s, American women had fewer rights than a male inmate in an insane asylum. Women could not vote, serve on a jury, testify in court, hold public office, attend college, or practice law. If a woman were married, it was illegal for her to sign a contract, own or inherit property, keep her own earnings. She had to give it to the man in the family, husband, brother, father, whatever. And in terms of women, in terms of if they got a divorce, which was rare in those days, women basically did not have any rights to their kids, went to the husband. Women were expected to center their lives around their family, obey their husbands in all matters. You agree with that or not? Obey your husband? No. Also, not to voice a strong opinion in public, and also to behave in a refined and polite manner. That was the women of the 1890s, except for one thing. Women found bicycles, and they got on bicycles, and they were able to go from point A to point B without any help. Women also started to go to college. Women were able to become nurses, teachers, and secretaries, and that would hold for about 70 years in the 1890s. There was a gold rush up in the Klondike. This is Seattle. Seattle becomes a boom town because of the gold rush that is in the Klondike. American isolationism. Well, America did own Alaska, but it owned nothing else, and they were just there in North America, not looking to expand, at least not in McKinley's view, in 1897. The first subway opened up in Boston. That is off Tremont Street, near the State House in Boston. Hey, how many of you owned an Oldsmobile? You could buy an Oldsmobile in 1897.
Wait, I'm sorry, women could or?
Anybody, if you could afford it. That's an Oldsmobile or first car. By the way, who's buried in Grant's tomb? Who's buried in Grant's tomb?
Grant is not?
We'll talk about that.
The
The first feature film was a boxing match between Bob Fitzsimmons and James Corbett, and it was about 2 hours long. It was the first film, long-length film ever shown back in 1897. The computer, mechanical computer. Well, the Word makes its debut in 1897, and the basis of television, this thing here, the basis of television, this little tube is the basis of television. It was invented in 1897. Ice cream. Anybody want ice cream?
Yes.
Okay, and how do you get ice cream out of a big vat? You scoop it out, right? Well, Alfred Crail gets a patent for the first ever ice cream scoop in 1897. Dracula debuts. First story of Dracula. The New York Times slogan, all the news that's fit to print, that comes to be in 1897. And yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. in the New York Sun, a publication that I worked with about 20 years ago. But let's get back to money. And the 1896 campaign, William Jennings Bryan, that's an older picture of Bryan. He was only 36 years old then. He had hair then. And William McKinley.
Those are pictures or drawings?
They're both drawings. They're both drawings. In the 1896 presidential campaign, the Republican William McKinley thought of himself as a tariff man and expected that the monetary issues would fade away. He was mistaken. Gold and silver dominated the campaign. His opponent was William Jennings Bryan, and he was a Democratic and Populist Party nominee, and the entire campaign issue was money. Now, there was a depression in 1893, which was caused in part by Congressman William McKinley pushing the McKinley tariffs of 1890. Prices rose, companies couldn't afford it, started laying off workers, and who was paying the tariffs? Not the companies, not other countries, but the consumer. And if the consumer is laid off and doesn't have any work, well, you got a recession and a depression and jobs were lost, and that was what the country was like from about 1893 to 1897. In the 1896 election, the battleground was the Midwest. The South and most of the West were conceded to Bryan, and the Democrats spent much of his time in the crucial Midwestern states. The Northeast was considered most likely safe for McKinley after the early voting states of Maine and Vermont supported him in September. Republicans managed to attract some urban progressive voters by attacking Bryan as a religious fanatic, in addition to painting a dire picture of what abandoning the gold standard would mean for the economy. Basically, the dollar was pegged to gold. Every campaign since then, my opponent, if you let my opponent, if he or she wins, they're going to wreck the economy so fast you won't know what hit you. Every campaign. The outgoing Democrat Grover Cleveland, the president, did not support William Jennings Bryan. Puck magazine at that time, with the publication, thought that Bryan would be best for the economy, that McKinley was too weighed down with stuff. But on November 3rd, the voters had their say. McKinley won the entire Northeast and Midwest. He got 51% of the vote, ample majority in the Electoral College, and the people who voted for him were prosperous Midwestern farmers, industrial workers, and ethnic voters. He basically opened up the Republican Party to Jews, Eastern Europeans, Southern Europeans. His call was, we have a big tent. And to prove that point, in 1896, the opening of the Republican National Convention, the invocation was read by a rabbi, Rabbi Sale. The first time a rabbi ever gave an invocation at a political convention. Bryan had concentrated entirely on the silver issue and didn't appeal to urban workers. Voters in cities supported McKinley. Only city outside the South that had more than a 100,000 person population that was carried by Bryan was in Denver, Colorado. America's changing. That bridge was not there at that time. That's the Williamsburg Bridge. That would come about 6-7 years later. Behind there is Brooklyn. And in fact, in 1897, Brooklyn was a city unto its own. It was a city unto its own. The largest cities in the United States in 1897 were Manhattan, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Brooklyn.
Oh.
Those were the four biggest cities. They were amalgamated in 18.
Brooklyn was a city back then?
Brooklyn was a city until January 1st, 1898. On March 4th, McKinley was inaugurated as the 25th President of the United States, succeeding Grover Cleveland. His inaugural address emphasized economic recovery, protective tariffs. He was the king of tariffs, the Napoleon of protectionism, and the need for national unity. The bad economy powered McKinley to victory on strength of the electoral map. The unemployment rate was 12.4% when he took office. When McKinley became president, the Depression or Panic of 1893 had almost run its course. This is an interesting headline, tariffs in the economy. New York Times, July 18th, 1897, end of tariff fight. McKinley got his way, raised the tariffs in 1897. McKinley called Congress into special session to enact the highest tariff in American history. On July 24th, McKinley signed the Dingley Tariff Act into law. The act authorized reciprocal trade treaties. The act raised import duties to protect American industries from foreign competition, reflecting McKinley's commitment to protective tariffs as a means of promoting economic growth and stability. Now, in his defense, back then, you went up the Hudson River. Just go up the Hudson River. They made elevators over in Yonkers. On the other side, there were textiles and other stuff. That would be in Rockland County. You went all the way up the river, the Hudson River, there was something. And then you hit the Erie Canal, and you had Gloversville, and you had Endicott Johnson, the shoe people. And they had, later on in Binghamton, IBM. And then you had Kodak in Rochester, which is not on the Erie Canal. And then Buffalo, you had flour, you had grain, and you had steel, and you had the port. So he's protecting all of those jobs, which were important at that time. So they did not want to import things. They wanted things made in America. So in a sense, McKinley was protecting the workers. The tariffs, which is really consumer tax, helped fund the American government. And McKinley also got lucky. There was a gold rush in the Klondike, and that helped stabilize the American economy. Because Seattle was the last port before the Canadian Yukon, Seattle becomes very important, and two of the companies that came out of this, you might have heard of, Nordstrom's, the department store, and Eddie Bauer. Well, they're two of the things that came out. Now, meanwhile, this is the outgoing president, Grover Cleveland, and I was at the Grover Cleveland house in West Caldwell, New Jersey, and the woman who is the curator handed me the hat, the cane. She said, "I want to take a picture. You want a picture?" And I said, "No, I'm not going down Fifth Avenue with my fancy sticks, putting on the Ritz." But she took the picture anyway. I never thought I would use it in any talks. But Grover Cleveland ignored the monopolies. This is, of course, during the time of the Gilded Age. All those mansions up the street from here in Yonkers, some of them are still there. But there were mansions on the Hudson River, maybe about 4 miles from here. The Sherman Antitrust Act, in the business-friendly atmosphere of the McKinley administration, industrial combinations developed at an unprecedented pace. Newspapers characterize McKinley as a little boy led around by Mark Nursey Hanner, who was his political patron, who got him out of trouble in 1893 with money when he co-signed a loan for his friend Robert Walker for over $100,000. Walker went broke. McKinley was the governor of Ohio at the time and said, "Well, I better go back to practicing law so I can pay off this loan." And Mark Hanna, who was his handler, said, "No, we'll take care of it, but you listen to me from here on in," and he did. McKinley was not dominated by Hanna, and he condemned the trusts as dangerous conspiracies against the public good, but he didn't bother trying to bust them up. The Sherman Antitrust Act was signed into law on July 2nd, 1890 by President Benjamin Harrison. It was the first federal law to outlaw monopolies and trusts in industry, aiming to regulate interstate commerce. Here is the Sherman Antitrust Act, and well, here are the trusts, and they're carrying a big baseball bat, and they're the ones that people listen to because they had the money. The law was very poorly written and hard to interpret by the courts. The Gilded Age industrialists did business as usual. Neither the former President Grover Cleveland during his second term between 1893 and 1897, nor the new President McKinley, nor U.S. Attorneys Generals in power showed any interest in enforcing the Sherman Act. American life, it's Ellis Island, and people are coming to Ellis Island, but they're not the right type of people. They're not from Western Europe. They're Catholics, they're Jews, they're from Italy and Eastern Europe and from Russia, and some of them, they're bad people, like Jews, they're feeble-minded. We don't want them. We don't want them. But immigrants were coming, and it was very simple for somebody to immigrate to the United States. All that was needed was a treaty between the United States and such a country. And that person in such a country could come over, and if they got by Ellis Island, they were citizens, yes.
What is the word before examine?
It's waiting examination.
Waiting.
These people are all waiting to see the doctors there to make sure they don't have styes in their eyes or something. The American economy began to boom, leading to increased wages in the growing industrial sector, but not everybody was getting richer. Large number of immigrants, particularly from Europe, flocked to the cities, contributing to urban crowding and challenging conditions. Issues of poverty, inequality, and exploitation of workers were prevalent, particularly in urban areas where tenements and slums were common, like the Lower East Side of Manhattan. This side of Forsyth Street going west, that was the Italian section. East of Forsyth Street, that was the Jewish section. The Gilded Age was a time of wealth and extravagance for rich people, which helped cause significant social problems, which was the source of political corruption. On March the 2nd, in one of his final acts as president, Grover Cleveland vetoed an act to amend the immigration laws of the United States, which would have banned illiterate immigrants. Now, let me explain what an illiterate immigrant was. They gave you the test in your native language. If you could not identify about 50 words, they were going to let you in. But Jews, because they studied the Torah, knew the words, and they were able to get in, which would cause problems for the next 20 years or so. How to keep out the Jews because they were literate enough to be in the country. Cleveland said a long time ago, the same thing was said of immigrants who, with their descendants, are now numbered among our best citizens. The fight over immigration would continue. The proponents of immigration law wanted to keep Eastern and Southern Europeans out of the United States, Jews and Catholics. This is Pennsylvania, and this is the Latimer Massacre. And there were a lot of things going on in terms of workers in the 1890s rather. Grover Cleveland in 1894 sent in the army to break up the Pullman Railroad Porter strike. Strikes were nasty affairs. People got beaten up. People were killed because the robber barons didn't want to pay them. And Latimer is one of those examples. In Pennsylvania in August, the Honeybrook division of the Lehigh and Wilkes-Barre Coal Company laid off workers at its strip mines, cut the pay of the remaining employees, and raised fees for workers residing in the area's company towns. You know what a company town is? Okay. Remember the song 16 Tons by Tennessee Ernie Ford? You work 16 tons. Okay. And he can't die because he owes his soul to the company store. The company ran everything. They gave you money, but they also charged you for everything you bought in their supermarket or grocery. And you basically owed your soul to the company. The company consolidated its mule stables, forcing teenage mule drivers to travel unpaid much further each day to pick up their mules. After inconclusive talks, 25 to 35 teenagers struck on August the 14th. A scuffle between the supervisor and some drivers led to additional walkouts by strip miners and underground coal miners. By August 16th, nearly 2,000 workers were on strike. Nearly all the miners joined the United Mine Workers on August 18th. Within 2 days, almost all the mines in the region had closed due to the spreading strike. The first wave of the strike ended on August 23rd after the company agreed to pay overtime, bringing wages up to regional average, allowing miners to see their own doctors. Because when they were injured, you had to see the company doctor. After all, the company really owned you. And no longer forced miners to live in company-owned housing. Again, 16 tons, if you're familiar with the song, that's this life. Second strike began on August 25th. Teenage breaker boys at the A.S. Van Wickle coal breaker in the nearby village of Coleraine struck for higher wages as well. When Van Wickle attempted to use Slavic workers as strike breakers, the immigrants became known as scabs because of this. The Slavs also joined the strike. Although the strike spread to 2 other nearby coal works, the company quickly agreed to raise wages up to the regional average, and the strike ended on about August 28th. Well, it looks like everything is going to be okay, but it's not. Luzerne, Sheriff's Proclamation, James Martin. James Martin is the High Sheriff of Luzerne County in Pennsylvania. When the new pay rates were announced on September 1st, only a few workers received raises. Management did agree to treat Slavic workers more fairly, but the mine owners reneged on their other promises. The strikes resumed on September 3rd. 3,000 workers marched on 4 mines and shut them down. And this is the sheriff, James F. Martin of Luzerne County. The mine owners, now this went on, this was the usual acts in those days. The mine owners, they hired the private force, armed force, the coal and iron police. But they didn't hire enough of them to break the strike, so the owners appealed for help from the Luzerne County Sheriff, James F. Martin. Martin established a posse of about 100 English and Irish men to prevent any further marches. But within 5 days, 8,000 to 10,000 miners were on strike. On September 8th, mine owners demanded that the sheriff of Schuylkill County, near Philadelphia, arrest several thousand miners who had assembled near Pottsville, Pennsylvania, which is 90 miles north of Philadelphia, and force a mine to shut down. But the sheriff refused. Here's his posse, there are the workers, they got the guns, and they shoot to kill. The Latimer Massacre occurred on September 10th. The conflict erupted when an unarmed group of mostly Eastern European immigrant mine workers clashed with the militarily armed sheriff's deputies who acted on behalf of the private coal companies. 19 strikers died at the scene and dozens more were wounded, many shot in the back. Several had multiple gunshot wounds, which indicated they had been targeted by the deputies. Another trial certain, Sheriff Martin and others, Latimer murderers. What do you think happened? What do you think happened to them? Sheriff Martin and 73 deputies were arrested and put on trial. At the trial, the defendants claimed that the marchers had refused to obey an order to disperse and were charging toward the sheriff and his deputies. The sheriff and the deputies were acquitted. The massacre got mine workers to join the union of more than 10,000 miners and became new members of the United Mine Workers, and that's really the beginning of the UMW. Meanwhile, what's going on? Well, the Supreme Court in 1896 ruled on Plessy versus Ferguson, which meant that you could discriminate all you want as long as the black areas look the same as the white areas. Have fun. Go ahead and do it. The May 18th, 1896 Supreme Court decision in Plessy versus Ferguson, which upheld the separate but equal doctrine, is considered a landmark case in the establishment of Jim Crow. It wasn't only in the South. In New York, at Penn Station, up to 1963, there were white bathrooms and colored bathrooms. White drinking fountains and colored drinking fountains, separate but equal.
63?
Even in Penn Station in 1963 before they knocked it down. The ruling legitimized the segregation laws that were already in place in the South and contributed to the formalization of the Jim Crow system. While the Oklahoma Territory initially lacked Jim Crow laws, the territorial legislature passed a law requiring segregated schools. The separate coach bill was also known as Senate Bill 1, was the first territorial law passed by Oklahoma requiring separate facilities for different races. Meanwhile, on March 13th, the Dibble Act in California was signed. This act, introduced by Henry Clay Dibble and Theophilus Morton, aimed to prevent discrimination in public accommodations. Race war, lawless Negroes. Lawless Negroes. Atkins, Georgia, race war. While most newspapers described it as the Athens race war, occurred in Lee Township of Polk County, Arkansas in late May and early June. In what appears to have been an unprovoked incident, a group of African Americans attacked two white men, Jesse Nichols and J.R. Hodges, just south of Atkins, Polk County, on May the 30th. In subsequent encounters, several residents of Lee Township, both white and black, were killed and wounded. Despite the fact that the events in Polk County attracted national attention, newspaper records provide little information regarding the motives of those who perpetrated the violence. Whites versus Blacks, Nevada County, Arkansas, race war of 1897, that's an article in the newspaper. On May 29, 1897, white employees of the Sayre Lumber Company near Prescott, Nevada County, Arkansas, set fire to a cabin where 10 of the company's African-American workers were sleeping. When the black laborers attempted to flee, the mob fired shots at them. No one was killed, and due to the diligence of a private detective, indictments were actually brought down in the case. According to the Arkansas Gazette, by July 24th, Detective W.A. Clay had returned following a 2-month investigation into the case. On the basis of his evidence, Deal Beck, Willis Beck, Tom Johnson, and Alan Sherry were indicted for arson and assault with an attempt to kill. The four were accused of all charges in January 1898 in the Nevada County Circuit Court, but the judge acquitted them. He said unreliable evidence. Lynchings, one more body sways in the air. Tom Waller, another colored man, strung up by a mob. After the Civil War ended in 1865, African Americans were terrorized by the lynching of men, women, and children. Acts of violence were most common in 7 states: Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Maryland, Missouri, Ohio, and West Virginia, and in one territory, Oklahoma. The lynching mobs generally got away with the crime. President McKinley denounced the lynchings, but that's all he did. Nothing else after that. On December 15th, a white mob of 400 men lynched an African-American man named Tom Waller in Lawrence County, Mississippi. Waller was accused of helping to murder a white family despite a lack of evidence against him and claims of innocence. Without a legal trial or investigation, an angry white mob hanged him from a tree the same night he was arrested. A week earlier, after a white family was found murdered, the surviving 5-year-old child claimed a black man did it. Officials brought several black male suspects before her. She identified one of them, a man by the name of Charles Lewis, as the perpetrator. A mob of hundreds immediately formed, lynched Lewis on December 10th. There were 158 lynchings in the United States, 123 blacks, 35 whites killed. Women's rights. Hey, look at them. They're all dressed to the nines, complete with a hat and all that other stuff. In the 1890s, which was never referred to as the gay 90s, until the 1920s when somebody in the magazine said, hey, it's the gay 90s, but it was never referred to as the gay 90s. Significant strides were made in the women's rights movement, particularly regarding voting rights in Australia. The National Union of Women's Suffragette Societies was formed, uniting local suffrage groups and centralizing the efforts to gain voting rights for women. In the United States, despite McKinley's pledge to support women's rights as part of his 1896 campaign, there was no support. In March, women in Eugene, Oregon are prevented from voting in a local school election. On June the 4th, the Constitution of the state of Delaware is adopted. It retains male, M-A-L-E, as a qualification for voting despite attempts to remove the requirement. Now, women in New Jersey were able to vote until 1807, and then the vote was taken away from them. Voters in New Jersey defeat a proposal to allow women to vote in school elections. Voters in the Oklahoma Territory defeat a proposal for women's access to vote. Gold is gold in them there hills in the Klondike. Just go this way and you can make your fortune. Gold, gold, gold. join the journey. So you got on a trip in Seattle. My daughter lives in Seattle, so we got to see all these places. So you went out to the docks, you got on a ship, and you went north, hoping to strike it rich. The gold rush actually starts in 1896, except nobody knew it. On August 16th, 1896, Skookum Jim and his family found gold near the Klondike River in Canada's Yukon Territory. I've been to the Yukon. There's nothing there. Just a lot of snow. Their discovery sparked one of the most frantic gold rushes in history. Nearby miners immediately flocked to the Klondike to stake the rest of the gold claims. Conditions in the Yukon were harsh and made communications with the outside world difficult at best. As a result, word didn't get out about the Klondike gold discoveries until 1897. Almost a year later, a wave of gold seekers bought supplies and boarded ships in Seattle and also San Francisco. They headed north thinking they're going to strike it rich. More than 100,000 people from all walks of life, they basically abandoned their homes and embarked on an extended, life-threatening journey across treacherous, icy valleys and harrowing, rocky terrain. Gold, 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 gold. When you got there, you probably didn't find it. Less than half of those who started the trek to the Yukon arrived. Those who got there safely stood little chance of finding gold. By the midsummer, 18,000 people were in Dawson, with more than 5,000 working the diggings. By August, many of the stampeders started to go home, most of them broke, and there really wasn't much gold to be found. The great Klondike gold rush ended as suddenly as it began. Towns such as Dawson City, Skagway. I've been to Skagway. About 3 blocks in Skagway. There's nothing in Skagway, really. But you could go to Yukon from there. Began to decline. Others, including Dye, disappeared altogether. The discovery of Yukon gold made a few lucky miners rich beyond their wildest dreams, and many people made their fortunes off the back of miners chasing those dreams. Isolationism, that is Sitka, Alaska. That was the last capital of Russia, Alaska. This is the 4th of July, 2017, 8 years ago. And you go to Sitka, and there's still some architecture left over from the Russian days when Russia controlled it. But for the most part, America didn't care about anything. McKinley didn't care about what was going on in the Philippines with the Spanish. Didn't care about what was going on with the Cubans in the concentration camps that the Spaniards set up. Those concentration camps were the basis of Adolf Hitler's concentration camps. William McKinley's America was confined to an area with Canada to the north, 2 oceans to the coast, and Mexico to the south. There was also the territory of Alaska, which was separated from America by Canada. The McKinley administration did have a deal in place to annex Hawaii, but never signed the deal. America was an isolationist country. McKinley had no interest in the Philippines or the month-long war between Greece and Turkey. William McKinley didn't have really any interest in expanding the United States beyond what it had, although he did have some concern about Spain's poor treatment of Cubans, which was concentration camp type things. In McKinley's address to Congress on December 6, he stated that while the government of Spain should be given time to reform its behavior in Cuba, America would continue to devote significant diplomatic attention to the island. An island that America wanted in the mid-1850s to bring in as a slave state, because it was already a slave state to Cuba. McKinley also reminded Americans to refrain from factionalism, questions of foreign policy, of revenue, of the soundness of currency, the involatility of national obligations, the improvement of the public sector, appealed to the individual conscience of every earnest citizen to whatever party he belongs, no she, just he, or in whatever section of the country he, no she, may reside. Want to take the subway? You can take that subway still. It's still there. It's still there. It's functioning. It functions. And anybody been on the T in Boston? It's a subway. It's a subway. But the first subway was in Boston. The first public transit subway in America was constructed as a response to the intense street traffic which was choking downtown Boston in the 1890s and is still choking downtown Boston in 2025. The spine of the congested district from Scully Square, the nexus of the city street lines, down to Tremont Street and Boylston Street. Responding to the crisis of streetcar blockades, the state and city convened a rapid transit committee whose 1892 final report mapped out the solution for Boston's traffic problems, including potential routes to expedite street railways through the downtown. The first two subway stations to open to the public were Boylston Street and Park Street, with service commencing on September 1st of 1897. 100,000 people took that 3.5-mile trip that day. Well, speaking of traffic congestion, that's Olds, and the Oldsmobile vehicle, rather the Olds Motor Vehicle Company. It is August 21st. Ransom Eli Olds of Lansing, Michigan, founds the Olds Motor Vehicle Company. He was born in Geneva, Ohio in 1864, and he went to work for the family's machine repair and engine building business in 1883. In 1896, he completed his first gasoline-powered vehicle. The following year, he founded the Olds Motor Vehicle Company with financial backing from Samuel L. Smith, who made his fortune in lumber. You know how many cars they built? 4. That's it, 4 cars. Okay, so now we got the question of who was buried in Grant's tomb? Who's buried? Well, General Grant National Memorial. It's not called Grant's Tomb, is it? But when it opened on April 27th, Grant's tomb was dedicated. Dedication marked what would have been the 18th President Ulysses S. Grant's 75th birthday. Despite inclement weather, the dedication drew an estimated 1 million spectators, as well as more than 50,000 marchers who paraded to the tomb from Madison Square Park, which is near the Empire State Building, 6 miles north. Upon Grant's death in July 1885, his widow indicated his wish to be interred in New York. Within days, a site in Riverside Park was selected and the Grant Monument Association was established to appeal for funds. Well, before, you didn't win any money, but we can't let you go without getting a chance at some money. So Groucho would ask the question. He'd ask 2 questions, actually. What's the color of George Washington's white horse?
White.
Got $10 for that. Who's buried in Grant's tomb? Well, that answer is a little more difficult. Who's buried in Grant's tomb? Asked Groucho Marx of the inept contestant of his 1950s radio and television show, You Bet Your Life. By this point, Groucho's contestant had failed to correctly answer any of the trivia questions posed. George Fenneman was great as his sidekick, Fenneman. I love Fenneman. But anyway, getting back to the show. So, Groucho asked those 2 questions. What's the color of George Washington's white horse? Or, who's buried in Grant's tomb? Now, these answers were correct in the show. Grant, Mrs. Grant. But the right answer is no one. No one. Grant's tomb is a mausoleum. It does contain Grant's remains, but they are entombed, not actually buried. And one contestant got into an argument with Groucho over that, and then they finally accepted, yeah, he's not buried in Grant's tomb.
What's the difference between a tomb and
I was
buried?
going to ask.
Underground. He's not underground. He's in ground level.
Oh.
So that's basically it. Okay, this is the first film. I'm sure you probably wouldn't be interested in this first film, except there are fragments of this film that survive. Very few, but this was the first feature film. Most of it was lost in the midst of time. The Corbett Fitzsimmons fight is a documentary film directed by Enid J. Rector, depicting the boxing match between James J. Corbett and Bob Fitzsimmons in Carson City, Nevada on St. Patrick's Day, March the 17th. Originally running for more than 100 minutes, it was the longest film released to date. It's considered the world's first feature film.
What year was that?
Fitzsimmons, what?
What year was it?
1897.
Fitzsimmons won the fight, knocking out Corbett in the 14th round. The film premiered on May 22nd at the New York Academy of Music on 14th Street. Remember the New York Academy of Music?
Yes.
I went there for a concert when I was 8 years old, 1964. I think I also saw a film there, all part of a school presentation. So it was presented with somebody there, probably with a megaphone telling you what was going on. The film was also shown in Boston, Chicago, Buffalo, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, London, England, Cardiff, Wales, Dublin, Ireland, and Tucson, which was in Arizona, which was a territory at that time. The film is also notable because at the time women were essentially prohibited from viewing boxing matches, which were seen as stag activity, but they were not prohibited from viewing this particular film. Hey, the computer. No, that's not this one, that's another one. In fact, I just retired that one. 7 years, did its service, slowed down, so it's now in computer retirement. The computer, the journal Engineering used the word computer for the first time to describe a mechanical device capable of performing calculations. Before 1897, computer was primarily used to refer to a person who performed complex calculations like a mathematician or a bookkeeper. That is the first picture tube. That is the first picture tube. Now, TVs are flat screens now. They're no longer picture tubes. But that is that thing at the end is the forerunner of the picture tube. 1897, it was possible to get television going. The German physicist Carl Ferdinand Braun invented the cathode ray tube. The CRT harnessed an electron beam to create a real-time visual display on a fluorescent screen, setting the stage for the development of television and the modern computer monitor. Which is that? Ice cream! Time to get some ice cream. Well, that's the first ice cream scooper, 1897. While working as a porter at the Markel Brothers drugstore in Pittsburgh, Alfred Crail noticed his fellow employees struggling to scoop ice cream cones for customers. He decided to design a contraption to scoop ice cream easily with one hand. His invention, which he called the ice cream mold and disher, received a federal patent on February 2nd. According to his patent application, the disher will be extremely simple in its construction, strong, durable, effective in its operation, and comparatively inexpensive to manufacture. So how many of you have watched Dracula, read Dracula, watched The Munsters with Al Lewis playing Grandpa based on Dracula?
Munster, yeah.
Well, Dracula comes out. I actually know a guy by the name of Dini from Cluj, Transylvania. And when I was speaking on cruise ships, he was one of the entertainers. He came complete with the cape, did the piano and all that other stuff. And I said, who are we supposed to be? The Count Dracula. That's what he was
The what
doing.
Dracula?
The Count Dracula.
The Count Dracula.
Yeah,
So
Vlad.
Dracula played piano?
Well, he played Dracula and entertained people on cruise ships. Dracula is a gothic horror novel by the Irish author Bram Stoker. The narrative is related through letters, diary entries, and newspaper articles. There is no single protagonist. It opens with solicitor Jonathan Harker taking a business trip to stay in the castle of a Transylvanian nobleman by the name of Count Dracula. Harker flees after learning that Dracula is a vampire. I thought you blood. And the Count moves to England and plagues the seaside town of Whitby. A small group led by Abraham Van Helsing hunts and kills him. All the news that's fit to print in the New York Times. And I've been in that building. It's the first sports arena, multi-sports arena. Anyway,
Where is that?
Rome.
Oh.
Rome.
The
Got paid to
Colosseum.
get in there now. It's a Coliseum. You got paid to
That's
get
the
in there.
Colosseum.
Yeah. All the news that's fit to print. Adolph S. Oakes, the owner of the New York Times, created the famous slogan, all the news that's fit to print, which still appears on the masthead of the newspaper today. He wrote the slogan as a declaration of the newspaper's intention to report the news impartially, because during those days there was the yellow journalism war going on between Pulitzer and Hearst and the New York Journal, the New York World, and all that other stuff, and he wanted to stand out. Now, he dropped the price of the paper to a penny, hoping people would buy it. He was reacting to journalism, or yellow journalism, which was a prominent feature of the newspaper landscape, particularly in the competition between the New York World and the New York Journal, Oak's competitors. This style of journalism, characterized by sensationalism and exaggerated reporting, gained traction as publishers sought to increase circulation by appealing to a broader audience. I worked for the New York Sun about 20 years ago. I'm not going to get into they folded, and I told them, you got to get a website, you got to get video up on all that. They didn't listen to me, and then 20 years later, they're doing it. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. And it was in the New York Sun. This was the newspaper in my article in the New York Sun those days. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. Dear editor, I'm 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there's no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Virginia Old Hamlet, 115 West 95th Street, New York City. The columnist Francis Church responded, yes, there is a Santa Claus. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists, as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist. And you know, they abound and they give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would the world be if there were no Santa Claus? It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginians. And that was Church, and that was the New York Sun back then. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sight and sense. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not to believe in Santa Claus, you might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus, but even if they didn't see Santa Claus coming, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but there is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that no children or men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not. But there's no proof that they're not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are unseen or unseeable in the world. No Santa Claus. Thank God he lives. And he lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood. Well, Grover Cleveland left. See, we're wearing sort of matching hats, me and Grover Cleveland. Well, Grover Cleveland is done. Historians do not rank Grover Cleveland highly as president. Cleveland did help create a solid South, but the Democrats might encourage former Confederates to believe they had a friend in the White House. He called out federal troops during the Pullman strike in 1894 and was known as a Union buster. He threatened Britain with war over Venezuela, a boundary dispute, which set the tone for the modern executive. Regarding social policy, Cleveland comes across as racially intolerant. Cleveland's failures to deal with the panic of 1893, the Depression, handed McKinley, who kicked off the Depression with the tariffs of 1890, the White House in 1896. As of May 12th this year, you could buy this coin from the United States Mint, William McKinley. And McKinley's presidency matters. In the election of 1896 matters because that election was the first rule against city slickers, and McKinley would change, and though he's not ranked highly, he would change America policy. He was assassinated in Buffalo, New York, September 6, 1901. Died 8 days later, he's 58. For many years, William McKinley's presidency was considered just mediocre by historians. He was
Many of them believed an executive who was easily controlled by political cronies like Mark Hanna, and who was pressured into war with Spain in 1898 by the media, especially William Randolph Hearst, and public outrage. But McKinley did put America on the road to becoming a world power, issued in an era of world leadership by annexing Hawaii and acquiring Guam, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines after America won the 1898 Spanish-American War. He also added American Samoa, Wake Island, to the newly formed American Empire. He failed in getting the Virgin Islands. That was another thing that they were after. He wasn't able to get it, but the U.S. got it in 1917. McKinley dropped his support of tariffs by 1901 and embraced trade. His record of 54% tariffs on goods in 1897 was eclipsed by Donald Trump's 145% tariff on Chinese goods in 2025. Cuba gained its independence in 1902, the Philippines in 1946. There's not much left of the Latimer massacre in terms of evidence. There's this, in Pennsylvania, there's this marker. The backlash against immigrant minors took to hold to such a degree that just 2 years later, the United Mine Workers Association president, John Mitchell, called for a strike and added a plea for a more inclusive union. The coal you dig isn't Slavish, it isn't Polish or Irish coal, it's just coal. The phrase became a rallying slogan for the 1900 strike, as well as the famous 1902 anthracite coal strike, which won better working conditions, a shorter workday, and wage hikes. With increasing support from foreign-born workers, the UMWA began to recognize Latimer as the event that cemented new immigrant labor's loyalty to the Union. A memorial was dedicated in 1972. Lynching took until 2022 to get a lynching law on the books as a hate crime. March 29th, 2022, the United States President Joe Biden signed a bill into law to make lynching a federal hate crime more than 100 years after such legislation was first proposed. The House of Representatives approved the bill 422 to 3 on March 7, 2022. 8 members didn't vote. It cleared the Senate unanimously. 3 House Republicans, Thomas Massey of Kentucky, Chip Roy of Texas, and Andrew Clyde of Georgia, voted against the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act of 2022. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. In the 19th century, they were the women who were trying to lead to get women the right to vote. Stanton died in 1902, Anthony in 1906. Many men and women tried to keep the movement going. Most, but not all, women in the United States did get the right to vote because of the Constitutional Amendment in 1920. All indigenous Australians were granted the right to vote at the federal election level, 1962, and the qualifying age was lowered to 18 over there in 1973. Camp Skagway, let's go to Skagway. Weather is the same in Skagway as it is here. During the Klondike Gold Rush, Seattle transformed from a small port city to a major center of activity. It became the primary staging area and outfitting point for prospectors heading to the gold fields in the Yukon and Alaska. The influx of people to Dawson turned it into a legitimate city. It also led to a population boom in Yukon Territory, Alberta, British Columbia, and particularly Vancouver. The Klondike Gold Rush had a horrific impact on the local environment, causing massive soil erosion, water contamination, deforestation, and the loss of native wildlife, among other things. The gold rush also severely impacted the native people as they fell victim to new diseases such as smallpox and the introduction of casual drinking and drunkenness. Hawaii. Well, Hawaii, the big island, Kona. In 1898, America annexed Hawaii as the local sugar industry got what it wanted, no tariffs on sugar to the United States, and the U.S. got a military base in Hawaii. In 1900, the territory of Hawaii was granted self-governance and retained the Ailana Palace is a territorial capital building. Plantation owners and capitalists who maintained control through the financial institutions found territorial status convenient because they remained able to import cheap foreign labor. Such immigration and labor practices were prohibited in many states. Oh, here comes the tea. Here comes the tea. Other American cities followed Boston's example. New York opened nearly 9 miles of subway in October 1904. Philadelphia's system was built between 1905 and 1908. It was underground surface and elevated lines just like Boston. Today, the T in Boston serves over 1.3 million passengers a day. The Oldsmobile. Want to buy an Oldsmobile? Let's buy an Oldsmobile. 1900, the Oldsmobile name is first used. William Durant acquired Oldsmobile in 1908 during his creation of General Motors. At various times in its existence, Oldsmobile was able to pass as a luxury vehicle manufacturer. Most of the time, General Motors used Oldsmobile to fulfill a middle ground in terms of luxury level. The last Oldsmobile was produced, the 2004 Aero GLS Final 500 Collector's Edition. It rolled off the assembly line April 29, 2004. Grant's Tomb. Who's buried in Grant's Tomb? Nobody. Jazz concerts have been hosted outside of Grant's Tomb since at least 1975. Since then, concerts have regularly been held at or just outside Grant's Tomb. Ceremonies held at the memorial every year on April 27th, Grant's birthday. Harlem Week events took place outside of Grant's Tomb. New York's WNBC TV Channel 4 has hosted Independence Day television specials featuring Grant's Tomb in the background. These specials have showcased performers such as Bon Jovi and Beyonce. The Fight. The Corbett Fitzsimmons fight no longer exists in its entirety. However, it is known from contemporary sources that the film included all 14 rounds of the event, each round lasting 3 minutes. Only fragments of the film survived. Prize fighting was illegal in 21 states, and many cities and states tried to ban the film, but their efforts to ban fight films were mostly unsuccessful. The film is considered the first pay-per-view boxing match. The remaining fragments of the film are part of the Library of Congress. The television screen, that's a good Dairy Queen. That's in Ohio. It's my daughter and I outside of Pittsburgh. More than 21 centuries ago, Greek scientists created a mechanism that used brass gear wheels to predict the movements of the sun, the moon, and probably most of the planets, essentially inventing the world's first computer. That device was found in a shipwreck in 1901. On February 15, 1946, Ursinus Professor of Physics John Macaulay and University of Pennsylvania Professor J. Presper Eckert unveiled their invention to the public. It's ENIAC, the first modern computer. My wife sung national anthems at Madison Square Garden. That's one of her performances at the Garden, and it was on TV, and we got a copy of it. It's on YouTube now, and you can play it on the computer screen or a TV screen like this. The first successful electronic television system was invented and demonstrated by Philo Farnsworth in 1927. While earlier mechanical television systems existed, Farnsworth was the fully first electronic system, transmitting a straight line on September 7th, 1927. But Nazi leaders determined to beat Great Britain and the U.S. to be the world's first television broadcasters began Greater German Television in March 1935. The Nazis perfected TV. Used for the 1936 Olympics, except they couldn't sell the TVs, and they basically went back to whatever the Nazis did. W2XB New York. Today, Channel 4, WNBC, began commercial TV broadcasts on April 30th, 1939, with President Franklin Roosevelt's opening remarks at the New York World's Fair. Oh, Dairy Queen, good old Dairy Queen. Alfred Krell never profited from his ice cream scoop invention. He was the first man of color
in Pittsburgh to receive a patent for his invention.
Oh,
Count Dracula. Grandpa.
yeah.
Al Lewis, the Munsters. Dracula has been adapted many times across virtually all forms of media. The novel and its characters have been adapted for film, television, video games, animation over 700 times. About 10,000 additional appearances in comic books and on stage. In 2015, the Guinness Book of World Records named Dracula the most portrayed literary character. All the news fit to print, New York Times Magazine. There were more than a dozen New York City newspapers in 1897. Only 2 have survived, Ox Times and Alexander Hamilton's New York Post, which was founded in 1801. A third New York City newspaper is barely hanging on. The New York Daily News was started in 1919. The newspaper industry in the United States is on life support, as most big cities have just one paper. News staffs have been cut, and advertisers are spending money on other media platforms. Miracle on 34th Street. That's where we leave it. Santa Claus has been the subject of countless films, cartoons, and television shows, with radio programs and recordings. Numerous actors have played Santa Claus, including Ed Asner and Fred Astaire. The best-known Santa Claus films include Miracle on 34th Street. Any questions? Any comments? Your turn to talk about what happened in 1897 and how modern 1897 really